since those three physicists has gotten the Nobel Prize for quantum is no longer a theory. Quantum exists, okay.
Nice.
Since they finally, have you read about
No,
this?
we are live though, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'd love to hear about it later.
Okay.
All right, good morning. We are here at Unity of Springfield on Sunday, October 8th. I am laughing because Bobby just took care of one fly and I just saw another one fly in front of the camera. So good morning to those of you who are online, and thank you for those who are here. We'll probably have some more people filter in as they tend to do this nice brisk morning. So this morning we are finishing up our three-part series on Soul Mastery by Toni Boehm. I always want to say her name wrong. And so this is the book that we've been discussing. Here it is in the flesh, or the paper as it were. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, deceptively small book for big ideas. And this week is kind of evidence of that there in this last section of the book, there's just so much. So I tried to kind of get us down to some core ideas, but there's really, this last section could have been a whole other series all in and of itself. So a reminder that we've been talking about the quadrilogy of soul mastery, and so that includes energy, frequency, and vibration, conscious neutrality, soul evolution, and mastering abundance. And so first week, we kind of went over the whole overview and talked about soul mastery. Last week we did energy, vibration, frequency, and conscious neutrality, and this week we're going to talk about soul evolution and mastering abundance. So Toni's definition of soul mastery is a shift out of a third-dimensional human ego survival dominated orientation and reality into a multi-dimensional, universal, and quantum oriented existence. And that feels big. Yes, that feels big. And I have to say, the first time I read that, I was like, oh, that's a lot of words. And I don't know if you guys ever do that, where you read something and you think, oh, that's too many words, and that concept is too big, and it's almost like your brain shuts off for a second. But now, like, just reading it just then, I'm like, oh, like, all of those words make a little more sense after I've been through all this material. And I read that and go, yeah, I know exactly what she's talking about there. So that's just kind of a cool thing about when we dive in and really pay attention to something and figure out how those words go together. So to start out with the soul evolution, she talks about 7 initiations or phases of soul evolution. And so this is a framework that comes from a 1930s talk by Unity founder Charles Fillmore, where he described soul evolution or spiritual journey as having 7 distinct phases or initiations. And he stated that these initiations were what he called the Christ template, and he came up with these 7 phases by going through the teachings of Jesus and picking out what he felt like were the 7 distinct phases that the Christ, Jesus, went through on his journey. And he says that it's important for us to recognize the phases because if we can recognize that we're in the midst of one, and we have an understanding that it's part of our soul growth, then it can be a catalyst for allowing a smoother movement or transition from one phase to the other or through our journey, and that we have a deeper understanding of the lessons contained within. And I would think that many of us have had that experience as we've come into New Thought teachings, that the more we understand about the spiritual journey, the more we have awareness in the moment. Oh, this is what this is. And I know, and with that, you know, knowing that we're always connected and knowing that good is for me and things are moving towards my highest good at all times, then we're much more apt to recognize these phases and go, oh, yay, I'm moving through another growth process. I know Sue jokes a lot, and I've gotten it from her, where when something tough is happening, to say, oh, here we grow again. Because it's all about that spiritual growth. And so if you're even in the midst of some of these kind of tough stages, and you can recognize that, then it just makes the process more meaningful. Fillmore also pointed out that within each of these phases, there's minor phases, and so we're not going to go into all of that. But he likened that to Jesus's statements regarding the 7 times 7. So there's 7 phases that Charles Fillmore saw distinctly in the teachings of Jesus, but then there were subcategories, and so he said that is, again, that's that there's never just a linear step 1 to step 7. There's lots of little nuances within there, and again, he likened that to the 7 times 7. He also said that each time you enter a new rung of spiritual evolution, you're starting the phases over again in a different context, in a different dimension of advancement, a different phase of life, and that really, you know, our human experience is a never-ending process of conscious evolution. So we don't get to go through these 7 phases just one time and we ascend to out of this human realm. It's a going through the phases, taking the lessons that we've learned, and then the next time when it starts over, we're at a higher level of awareness within those phases, and it just keeps building and building as we go. So we'll briefly go through these phases today. I say briefly, there's 7 of them, so it takes a minute, but I didn't go super in-depth to each one for time's sake, although we have less people in the room today. Maybe we'll have, depending on conversation. We'll see. But so first is the birth. And birth is the invitation to energetically awaken to your inherent divinity, or the truth of your being, the I am. This first awakening is just like the very first awakening, the first time that you're going through this rung of your spiritual growth. Charles Fillmore says it's the inkling in the mind of the possibility that you are something more than you thought you were. And each birth phase on the spiral of spiritual growth is allowing us to unravel more and more about the true nature of our being and to rest into the full I amness of who we are. And I thought this was, you know, cool. Toni put in there, she said, more often than not, when you hear people tell their story of first being introduced to Unity or New Thought services, they talk about a feeling that overcomes them, a sense of I am home. Some people have an emotional release and they cry as they're hearing this information for the first time. And, you know, she says that sense of home, that's a sign of your inherent divinity, the I am, being sparked and awakening and being so excited that you've opened your eyes to something bigger. And I know we hear that often here at Unity of Springfield, that people talk about when they walked in and how it felt. And I know for myself, I always tell people, if you're not ready for radical acceptance, we're not the church for you. Because it was a little, and I say that in the best way, but that was the feeling the first time walking into Unity of Springfield, just feeling absolutely accepted exactly where I was, for exactly who I am, with no strings attached. And that was something that I had not felt in other realms in my life, and so it was quite overwhelming that first day. It felt great, but it also felt a little scary, because what are you capable of if nobody is putting their stuff on you? And so it feels big. It feels like, here I grow again. And so, but it's an amazing experience that a lot of us share. The next phase or initiation is 2 baptisms, water and spirit. And so they talk about this in the sense that the water baptism is that kind of purging the mind of the third dimensional error thought. So that's when we are we learn to start effectively consciously using things like denials and affirmation. We start to lean into those teachings of forgiveness and spiritual practices like meditation. And so that's kind of the first baptism into things. And then they talk about the spirit baptism is when our intellect finally loses hold on the mind and allows spirit to strip away the remaining third dimensional thinking. And so that's the baptism of spirit, where our human mind allows spirit to kind of take the wheel there. The third phase is wilderness with temptations, and this is an interesting phase because it's one that is sometimes difficult to be excited about, unless depending on your awareness level. So this is where spirit leads you into the deep recesses of your shadow self, and is giving you the opportunity to demonstrate what you have fully brought into your consciousness and what you've assimilated so far. And so this, like I said, this doesn't always feel great in the moment, because when we have to confront our shadow self, we have to confront the thinking, that error thinking that still remains, things that bubble up that we thought maybe we had put away. But again, we can't grow past it until we have fully sorted all of that out. And so that's why we're led in that direction, so that we can fully release those shadow thoughts or embrace the shadow aspect of our consciousness. It's not always that you have to release things. You can fully embrace it and understand that it's all part of the greater good as well. The next phase is demonstration leading to transfiguration. If anybody has any thoughts about any of these phases, feel free to jump in too. So demonstrating what you've learned through ministry and sacred service. This is where we start to apply through action what we've established in our consciousness. So, and we talk about that a lot here at Unity of Springfield as well, that, I know Mary says it every time she gets up and she's doing a call for volunteers and things, that truly one of the biggest ways to feel a deeper connection is by serving others and serving with others and joining in that energy of being the demonstration of principle out in the world. And that's what this phase is all about. Yeah, there's a microphone there in the middle. Sorry. Closer to it.
Good morning. What's happening?
How does demonstration leading to transfiguration compare to integration? Are they parallel?
Integration of what?
Well, as an action, this is demonstrating what you've learned through ministry and sacred service, where we apply through action what we've established. That is a form of integration.
Demonstrating what you have integrated through ministry and sacred service.
There you go.
Demonstrating what you
So maybe we're kind of going, our comedy relief has arrived now. So you've got the baptism in spirit where you've allowed that third dimensional thinking to be stripped away. Then you have your wilderness with temptation, where you really get it sorted out. What have I assimilated into my consciousness? And, where am I sitting in principle, and how firmly am I sitting in principle? And then going out in the world for that demonstration. So yes. I think
the doing here demonstrates that you have integrated.
Yeah.
The cherry on top of it.
Yeah.
I would think that too.
What are we talking about, by the way? Could you?
It's the part 3 to
Okay.
the soul mastery. So we're talking, these are the 7 phases to soul evolution as lined out by Charles Fillmore in his study of Jesus' teachings.
Would you mind going back to the 7 things, that way they can kind of visualize?
Well, I mean, we were here. We missed last week, and then we were here for the first one.
But this was the
Cool.
7
Yeah, so we've got the 7 initiation phases of soul evolution.
It
And
follows
so that-
the story of Jesus, kind of.
Yes, so Charles Fillmore, in studying Jesus' teachings, these are the phases that he thinks are the distinct phases, and then there's minor phases within. But these are kind of the big ones, and this is what he sees us doing, these initiations or phases over and over again as we move up the spiral of spiritual growth.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Oh, and I meant to look up pronunciation of this to make sure I was Gethsemane. That's what Gethsemane, or that's what I would say. So, this is where we truly discern and establish in consciousness the idea that all decisions, regardless of consequences, must be made in alignment with the divine will of Source. And so, it's truly going back to that idea that every decision that we make is impacting the greater world around us. And so to truly be making decisions for the greatest good, we would be making decisions from alignment. And so she talks a little bit about, this is where you start to have an awareness that there might be a decision that would seemingly be like maybe the best for you personally, or maybe not even that it would be the best for you personally, but it's something that you have thought you've always desired, you thought you always wanted. But when you're seeing it from a place of true alignment with the will of Spirit, you may realize that that thing you thought you always wanted isn't really what would serve you to your best and highest. And so sometimes we have to kind of let go of those things in order to be in alignment, or sometimes there's things that Spirit is nudging us to do that feels really huge. So she talks about the fact, like you've been in a 10-year relationship and you're getting that nudge that like this relationship is not serving my best and highest good, and there's all sorts of signs being thrown your way that relationship is no longer where you need to be. But it's hard to let go of that because there's a big unknown of what's going to happen when you let go of that, or what comes next. Will I find another relationship? Like all of those questions. And so that's the idea that regardless of the consequence, if it's being pushed, because the consequence will always be in alignment with your greatest good. It just feels really scary to us in our humanness sometimes. And that many of us have probably had that experience where we had to release something that we were really attached to in order to find where we were actually supposed to be in that moment. And so it's that trust, that faith of sitting into that, the consequence. If I'm in alignment with the will of Source, as those decisions are being made and it's right action and right thinking, then the consequences will always be in alignment with good. phase is the crucifixion. And so, this is metaphysically when we talk about the crucifixion, we talk about that it's the crossing out, it's the releasing of the last vestiges of old beliefs and perceptions that have held us hostage to those lower dimensional vibrations. And that it is, in a way, it's a death of old self. It's a death of old thinking, of old self. It's a release, however you want to view that. And they talk about, in these phases especially, that those things tend to, within the stories of Jesus, the crucifixion was not a quick event, right? There was a lot of things leading up to it, and then there was a time frame for the actual, death of Jesus occurring, and all of those things. And so the same goes for us metaphysically, that these tend to not be, oh, that idea died and I'm born anew immediately. There tends to be a process with it. It can happen that way, but more often than not, we need the time to allow ourselves to fully release that old thinking and that old idea, and to kind of reframe things in our consciousness so that we can move forward. And then the same with the last phase of resurrection and ascension. And so again, the resurrection, there was the tomb experience, and that took 3 days, and there's all of these themes within the stories of certain time frames being lined out. And so Charles Fillmore, as well as Toni, talk about that those time frames, those are built into the story for us to recognize that it is a process, and that we do need to allow our consciousness time to reformulate where we're at, and to move up that spiral. And so a true resurrection and ascension is the unification of spirit, soul, and body in a spiritual oneness. And it says, after energetically dying to the illusion of sin and duality thinking, we resurrect into a new awareness, a new life, and a new energy. And then we begin again. And then the next time we go to growth, we start with that birth. So there's a birth that comes after the resurrection and ascension. Does anyone have thoughts on those phases? Yeah, Bobby's the next, right?
It's off.
I noticed a trend that it's like every step is like a releasing, another release, and in some instances, like baptism was also representing death of an old life and the beginning of a new.
Yeah,
as
the
well.
washing away and
Yeah.
cleansing. Yeah. No, you're just okay.
The guard of the shepherd.
Couldn't tell if you were just like stylistically holding the microphone, or if there was a thought. Okay. And so I was telling everyone at the beginning, but we've had a few more join us in the room. So the last part of this on the soul evolution and the mastering of abundance, there's some of the concepts that are like these 7 phases of initiation. Each one of those phases has lots of information behind it, but when trying to like pull out just a few of it got really deep here at the end. And so I thought, depending on, I'm looking at the clock now and thinking, oh, maybe we would have had time to go into more of that. But I didn't want to get too in the weeds, and maybe that's a whole other talk with some other materials at some point. But this is kind of the basis of, what we're doing, evolving our souls and moving through all of these steps. And so it's, again, it's things that we've probably heard in other materials. I always like to hear things again, because in that learning and relearning process, I always hear something different than I've heard before. Toni had a big life-changing experience where she was called to reread and study the Sermon on the Mount, and so she relates a lot of things to that within this book and within some of her other texts that she's produced. But it gets really in the weeds of that, and so I didn't know if we were ready to go there in this class. Yeah, Greg.
Speaking of the big life-changing experience, how would she or you relate that to the 7 stages? You go through all 7 stages and that denotes a life-changing experience, or is it the crucifixion stage? I mean, she experienced something that gave her a direction. Does that fit with the 7 rules? Does that, is there a stage that she was like, I was doing this and learning and growing, and then crucifixion, boom, and then I had to change everything?
Yeah, I think that she would so she talks about this nudge coming from Spirit, that like she was in the middle, I think she was even in the middle of writing a different book, or she was in the middle of doing something completely different. And she had this idea, there's lessons in the Sermon on the Mount that you need. And she was like, okay, cool, like I'll put that on my list, that's what I'll do next. And she went back to doing what she was doing, and it was like, no, you need to do this now. Like, you need to put the other thing aside, and you need to go and explore the Sermon on the Mount and what it has to teach you. And so I think she would consider that a little bit of a birth experience. Like there was an awakening to this other awareness, because as she said, as she began to read through it, that she physically felt like the buzzing, the awakening, the like, oh, like I'm reading this with new eyes. And things started to come out of that experience that she hadn't seen or heard in those stories or in that scripture before. She also had the same thing. She had an opportunity. She was invited to come into the archives at Unity Village, and invited to be kind of in a section of the archives that the public is not invited to go through. There was all these old writings from Charles Fillmore, and just a bunch of stuff that had kind of been put back. It hadn't been cataloged and protected yet, but she was invited with another colleague to go in and for them to start sorting through. And so there's a couple of things from Charles Fillmore that she has now put out that were some of his old, like he used to do correspondence courses initially. And so there were some correspondence courses that he wrote, but he never sent out. Like they weren't finished. He didn't feel that they were, I guess, finished enough to go out, or he changed his mind, or whatever. And so she talks about the experience of finding a few of there's one in particular that she references a couple of times, that she says as soon as she picked up that paper out of the pile, it was like that manuscript had an energy, and she immediately knew that it was her job to go through and get this ready, that it was the time for it to go out and be ready. I heard Lucy's talking about that. Because she talks about it so powerfully in here that, how, and it sounds, to someone who's not felt kind of an energetic call like that, it sounds a little woo-woo, as some people would say, right? But if you've ever touched something or experienced something and had that same kind of like zing to the core of who you are, that this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing in this moment, or you are the person that is supposed to move this forward, it's really powerful. And so that's where she talks about where some of this material has come from. Again, is not new. It's just as she was looking at it through fresh eyes and kind of being called to bring it to everyone's attention in a new and different way, she felt like other people might need that same perspective. So then then going on to the mastering of abundance. So again, it's what we know, right? That everything is energy and that's all there is to it. If we match the frequency of the reality we want, we cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way because those are the laws of the universe. And so she says, if we're consciously participating with the principles, if we are playing in energy and we understand that energy, frequency, vibration is the stuff that we are all made of, and we are able to, apply parts of the other three parts of the quadrilogy, then the ability to master abundance is just kind of an easy flow. It's an easy sell, right? Because you already have all of the things, the thinking and the energy is already moving in that direction. And so that's why she has it at the end, because if we're moving there, then it feels natural.
A lot of the stuff just falls into line. They said the attraction of abundance is a side effect, a symptom of what the work that you're doing, not your goal generally. Kind of a trap set as a goal in and of itself.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was having a moment of gratitude for the reason that I do these courses, do these classes on Sunday morning, is I get out of it every bit as much or more than what I put into it, because I love coming here and I love being in this room with like-minded people who have slightly different perspectives, and we get to throw out those ideas and learn and go up that spiral together, and I get so excited about it sometimes. I had a little freeze moment because I was just like, this is all just so great. Yeah, John.
So, when you're talking about the more rapid change too, sometimes it's like with Paul, when he had the instant change on the road to Damascus, that sometimes it's, and Abraham Hicks talks about it, about where you're asking and resisting and asking and resisting and asking and resisting, and you get this kind of a buildup of energy, it's already there, just waiting. And then when you get into that, matching the frequency and coming into that state of acceptance, that bam, and it happens more quickly.
Charged energy.
Even though that's not the norm, that's not the more frequent way that people evolve. But,
right, and so that makes me think, Toni does talk about that at one point, that, and her term is the synchro divinity, that's what she called, all those things that start to line up. And so she talks about that as well, that as we're moving through this spiritual evolution and things, there are those moments that are happening. We just might not catch all of them. And so it's been building, and then bam. Yeah, this huge, I'm like, oh my gosh, this, I had no idea, that this was coming. I just sat into the acceptance of the abundance of the universe, and here it is. But we sometimes don't give ourselves enough credit for the work that we're doing, as well as the universe enough credit for all of the things that have been lining up the whole way as we become more and more aware.
Yeah, that resistance itself makes for a much more violent, final crucifixion, and then catharsis at the end. Because it's if you're going really fast in this direction, God's gonna get you if you're supposed to go that way. And so if you're putting along, it's a pretty easy, simple turn. Yeah, I'll follow the road. But if you're stubborn about it, you're gonna get slapped.
And that's what Sue has referred to it a couple of times as it gets smacked in the head with a cosmic 2x4. Right? If we're not paying attention, it's boom, attention. I've got this great thing waiting for you. I just need you to snap out of this error thinking or this last little, just let go of the last little bit so we can get there. So she talks about tenets of abundance. And again, this is all, it's all the stuff that's been building, right? So as we're moving through all of those other phases, this is why the abundance, kind of what Greg was saying, it becomes like the symptom of the work you're doing, because as we're moving through and we start to have an understanding and a belief that abundance is my natural state of being. Well, how can I truly sit into abundance as my natural state of being and not have abundance show up all around me? You can't have one without the other. If we sit into that we are a vibrational being living in a vibrational universe, well then we have to start tuning in to the vibrations and the frequencies of the energies around us and understanding that we are part of that vibration and that we have the ability to play with that vibration and frequency within this experience. That our vibration holds a frequency and that the frequency is governed by laws, where we're saying that you create your reality experiences and manifestations through and in alignment with the vibrational frequency you hold and emit. Again, it is the law. So once we, as we're working through all of these other phases, or the quadrilogy, get my terms right, so we're, what I'm talking about, but as we're going through that and truly reaching that, soul evolution point, we're going up and up, then that is when the manifestations start to come at a higher rate, right, or greater frequency, because we're in that energy field, we're in the flow, as people say. Other things, if you hold back, it is your lack. So, and it is always that, right? When we're standing on the edge of something great, and we're afraid to take that step, like we just can't make ourselves take that step. It's always a lack thought somewhere in there, right? Like the fear is tied to a lack thought that we haven't been able to move through or let go of yet. She talks about all things hold energy and represent a frequency level, so that includes money, goods, trees, flowers, thoughts, feelings, emotions. It's all energy, and it is all vibrating at its level. The honest self-observation of your emotions, thoughts, and words is the training tool that opens your heart toward an understanding of what generosity of spirit means. And so I think we see that as you can, have that honest self-observation, it is that you cannot be, you really cannot be more loving and compassionate towards others than you can if you aren't at that same level for yourself. Like you can't be, how am I trying to say that? Okay. And so as we start to sit into that honest self-observation and we start to release some of those cultural thoughts and values and things that have been placed on things, and we start to see all things as energy and all people as having that Christ spirit within, right? Then that is when we crack open and to the generosity of spirit, and it just goes deeper and deeper with each relearning and spiraling up of this process. And I think I've talked about it before, my work is with people, and my work is with people who are in very emotional circumstances. It's sometimes good, but a lot of times it's not, doesn't start out great. And so I feel like I have gotten better and better in my work as I have gone through this process with myself, because I'm much more likely to pause and think, what is the thought behind this behavior that the person is showing me right now? So instead of just getting frustrated, this person is yelling at me on the phone, or this person is stomping around in the lobby, or whatever that behavior looks like. This process has, I think, because it's that self-observation, I think, what would have to be going on in my thoughts for it to manifest as this behavior? Wow, I would have to be really dysregulated. I would have to be really upset to be screaming at a stranger in a lobby, right? And so if you can come from that place where you know that there is still that Christ spirit within, and you're trying to find, okay, what is this? What is the need behind this? What's going on here? And you can meet that person with that energy, then it changes everything. And that's how we are constantly met by spirit. When we're acting out and stomping around and not wanting to listen, spirit meets us with, okay, and I still see the spirit within you, and I still know that you can do great things.
As they yell at you, remember that they're desperately seeking energy, like a drowning person swiping at your hand, and the control that you get to wield in that moment is if you can see that and you understand where are they coming from. You're not going to unconsciously lose your own thread, lose your own energy, lose your own consciousness level, and you're able to give to them rather than if you were unconscious of yourself, then they would take from you. And the difference is you can set the boundary on how much you will give, rather than if you don't know that they're taking, there's no one to stop them. And so they drag you right down and give you a horrible day as well. Until you both recognize that what they're trying to do and have developed your strong enough boundaries to be able to interact with the most energetically chaotic person that you're going to meet in that afternoon. Right?
Yeah, and I don't know, it just works itself out in amazing ways. And again, I credit this being in this community and going through this growth and just having that maybe slightly different perspective of awareness and consciousness as some of my coworkers at times. And so, but what's interesting is watching one of those interactions happen. I recently had a situation where it was a teen, and she was just mad at the world, man. She was mad at the world, and things were not going her way, and she could not see how things were working towards her greatest good in a moment. And that was coming out in some really rough language. It was coming out in some threats and things like that. And I just, she would say something like, I'm about to punch a hole in this wall. And my response was, I'd rather you not. Let's talk about that. Or I would just give her a moment and then say, okay, here's what I'm trying to do. Or how do you want this to work out? Just try to get her questions that would activate a different part of her brain maybe. And my coworkers who were listening to this, they were like, first of all, I can't believe you had her come in your office, like you were trapped in your office. I was never trapped in my office. And then they were like, man, if she had been talking to me like that, I can't believe you never told her to stop cussing. I'm like, what was she hurting by cussing? Like, she's offending my sensibilities? Like, no, that was the language that she was using. That was the energy that she was trying to expend. And I was like, my take on it is the more that she was cussing and using her language to show me how frustrated she was, the less likely it was that she was actually going to start punching walls or getting physically aggressive. And there was a few of them that kind of went, oh, I get your point. Now I see what you were doing. And there were still a few of them that were like, well, I'm not going to let anybody talk to me like that. I was like, okay. personally, like the fourth agreement, or one of the four agreements, not taking things personally. And it's hard sometimes, especially when people are seeking that energy out, and maybe they are coming at with like seemingly personal attacks, but it still isn't personal. It's just the behavior that is being, like, they're kind of upping the ante to try to get what they're needing. But I just have seen the biggest impact on my relationships with people and how I interact with others in this section of that breaking open of the heart towards the generosity of spirit. Yeah, John.
Yeah, and sometimes, a person also needs to make the choice to put that boundary, because the presence of somebody coming to part of it seems like that triggers them.
Yeah.
And so for them, that might be that's where their boundary needs to be for that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
And they're just not in a position to do what you did.
Based on our growth.
Yeah, just based on where they're at.
See, look at John thinking about the other person on the other side. And I do that too. Like when people are saying, "Well," I just go, "Okay," and I do recognize that's where you're at, and you know, we would just do it differently. The last tenet that she has here: mastery of the spiritual principle of abundance causes that principle to be a demonstrable, sustainable, and repeatable pattern that is forever at your disposal. And that kind of goes back to those neural pathway conversations that we were having, right? That once so she's saying, you know, when you have mastery of the principle of abundance, that is when, like, you know without doubt that it's a repeatable process. It's not a fluke. That thing that happened, that came out of the blue, like, you sit into that knowing that's not a fluke. That is the abundance of the universe showing up in my life, and it'll happen again.
Of course,
and
good
again,
things
and
are
again.
always happening
Right,
to me.
of course. And yes, I find myself saying that. Someone said, what was it? It was something that happened here at the church. I was like, of course it did. Of course it did. Because how would it work out any other way? Like, just something that, you know, none of us had even thought of as the solution or the possibility, and then just like, boom, there it is, on platter. Here you go. And, you know, and you start appreciating the little things as well. You know, I can't tell you how many times I'm driving in my car and a light turns green just as I get up and I go, thank you. Or, you know, just all the little things that happen if you start to notice them and realize that it is that abundance, that pattern that is showing up. It'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I love this. Abundance is not something we acquire, it is something we tune into, by our co-founder Charles Fillmore. And, you know, so she talks about that truly mastering abundance is not about a focus on acquiring money or material things. It's really on how to demonstrate spiritual principles such as abundance, life, joy, peace, as a repeatable and sustainable state of awareness. Like, that is the abundance, right? It's not just abundance of money, abundance of stuff. It is the true abundance of everything
Life.
in the universe. A true abundance of life, yes. And in getting there, in doing so, it might lead to the appearance of more money and stuff and other things in your life, because there is no choice but for abundance in all areas to be manifesting if you're truly in that mastering of abundance consciousness. And then, as a conclusion, just reminding us that each individual consciously chooses to ascend the spiral of conscious evolution, that as each individual. The soul mastery frequency becomes more and more the dominant energy of the collective mind. And as we transform, we so transform the world. And that's kind of, so we've got our own personal soul evolution going on, and then we have the evolution of this entire human experience going on, right? And so we're impacting the whole collective, and the collective is evolving together. And so I think that is, with the true soul mastery, knowing that we do have this individual human experience, and then it's that idea that we are, a drop in the ocean. We cannot be separated from the entire ocean. So we have what's going on in our little drop, but then we are a piece of this vast collective consciousness as well. And that's the kind of stuff that I can't think about too much, or like my brain just wants to explode. Like I truly have like mind blow moments. And these are the things I used to think about as a child that drove my mother crazy. So then, but and she would say, stop. She would just say, yeah, stop thinking about it. Because I would get really in my head about, but what about this and what about that? And so now I know, like, it was those inklings, right, of like bigger like connection. But in my child brain, I couldn't figure out how to connect it all and make it make sense. And, it was maybe a thought that was either new to my parents at the time, or they didn't know how to explain it either. So it was just like, yeah, because I would be like, I can't fall asleep because I'm thinking about whatever it was. And they're like, yeah, just go to sleep, Amy. Like, stop thinking about it then. I was like, I can't. Yeah, Jerry.
I have to relate a story about my youngest daughter. For a whole year, she spent all of her time asking us what God made and what man made. Did God make that? No, man made it. Well, did God make that? Yes, God made that. And technically, everything was made by God. It doesn't, at the same time, it was like the car was not made by God. Okay, but yes, it is in a sense. Okay, but it's just how simple we should all be. We should all just. For me, what I've come to find is that the simplicity of God will give me the most aha moments of anything. If that makes any sense, but.
It does, and I think, I don't have it in here, but I think there's even
Simplicity of God.
There's even a quote from Charles Fillmore about the connection, the greatest connection to source can be revealed through a childlike mind, meaning that all of the junk is stripped away. Like if we never put all that junk onto our childlike mind, we are born into knowing that connection exists, and then we like strip it away and add all this junk on top of it and forget, and then we have to go back and remember.
It's like child of wonder.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the Course of Miracles talks about, in a roundabout way, God has made everything, because it, like building a truck or tractors and factories and stuff, the only way that a tractor is built is with God inspires people the brain power to know how to build it. So in a roundabout way, if God didn't inspire these people, there would not be no tractor. So it's kind of just like that, because if God didn't inspire people to do things, we would not exist.
Yeah, and so, it's that idea, like in divine mind, there's nothing that hasn't already been created in divine mind, right? Like every physical manifestation has been held in divine mind.
And then Thich Nhat Hanh has the concept of interbeing, where this book, which was written on paper, meant that, you had to cut down a tree to make the paper, plus it took a lot of people to do that. But then you also, the tree needed the sun and the rain in order for the tree to grow, and the nutrients and the setting of a forest. And then there was somebody who had to cut down the tree, and then there's all these, that it's all interconnected, that it's we need to think, well, I'm doing this, well, there's a lot more involved, it's a lot more interconnected than if we look deeply into anything. And yet, it's simple to
One instrument of the symphony.
Yeah. The simple vastness, no. But yeah, it's that we, because it really is, that it's all of the human experience stuff we lay on top of the connection that makes it complicated in a lot of ways. Because the connection just is, and is always available. There's nothing, we don't have to do anything to get it, but we think we do, or we put all these ideas on it that we do. So we like overcomplicate the whole process as part of our human evolution. But like that's the whole experience of truly knowing who and what we are is going through. Like going through all of this and like really having those experiences and getting to do that. All right, awesome. So.
Get in our own way.
Yeah, we do love to get in our own way.
Yeah, we do.
So that is, we're gonna call that complete on this discussion with Soul Mastery. It is a good, like I said, there's deeper discussions about each of these 7 phases for sure, and for some of the other stuff that we've talked about, like I said, I may pull that into another class at some point down the road with some other stuff, but it'll be in the back of my mind that I could always pull that in to another discussion. But it's one that I would encourage you to pick up if this was intriguing to you. I'll go ahead and read some announcements. So, spirit groups are going to begin meeting this week to read and discuss the book The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. There's 4 facilitators. Participants can sign up in the future, or the future, if you want. Groups will run for 10 weeks and meet once per week for an hour to an hour and a half. If you have not read The Untethered Soul and studied that, it's one of my favorites.
There will
Every
also be
time
online options in the group.
John is saying there's going to be some online options this time around as well. The men's group will meet this Thursday at 10 a.m. Each week is a different discussion, so you're always welcome to join the group at any time. On October 11th at 6 o'clock, we'll have a volunteer training for all who would like to be involved in the cold weather shelter. It's for current volunteers and anyone who's considering becoming a volunteer. You will not be committed by coming to the volunteer training, but we would love to see you there just to get more information.
I do know how to do 96 hours, but
I was just say committed to what?
Yes.
72 hours.
You will not be obligated. You will not be obligated to volunteer simply by coming to the volunteer training, although we would love to have your energy and support in that. Calling all artists, crafters, and creators. Come see creations or show your own at the Artist Showcase next Saturday from 1 to 4. There are still interest forms in the foyer. You can fill one out and reserve a spot. We will need some volunteers to help stack and move chairs after service today so that we can be prepared for that. And we'll need volunteers right after the show is finished next Saturday to put all the chairs back so that they're there for Sunday morning. Next Sunday, the 9:15 New Thought World Religion Adult Sunday School class will be taught by John Brocker, and he's going to present part 1 of Becoming about that, and it's very intriguing.
Jody.
Next Sunday, the Compassionate Care Team will also have a meeting right after service. If you signed up to be part of that team, please plan to stay for the meeting. If you didn't sign up but you are interested, come to that meeting as well. Everyone is welcome. Today is week 6 of our 8 items in 8 weeks challenge for our shelter. We've had so much participation in this. It's been amazing. It's not too late to get involved. Just bring all 8 items before October 29th and you'll be entered in the drawing for $100 cash. And I think Daniel Nahon added a CD to that as well. This week's item is Cup of Soups. And October 20th, we have our annual spaghetti sauce cook-off and variety show. So if you have a special talent that you would like to showcase, please talk to Bobby or John Russ, and they will get you signed up and tell you when practice is and all that good stuff. Anything additional there, Bobby?
I mean, we're only gonna be rehearsing the day of.
Oh, okay. So it's not a huge, I can't use the word commitment anymore. Yeah.
That's why I'm not afraid of that.
It's not a huge commitment. Apparently it was, yes, okay. New member orientation is on October 22nd, right after service, and the new member ceremony will be October 29th during our celebration service. If you'd like to become a member, please ask for an application in the office. The requirements are really just that you've been attending regularly for 6 months, you have a desire to be part of this community, and that you attend the orientation. Mark your calendar for October 28th, which is a Saturday, for Spook Truncular from 5 to 7. Last year, we had a record number of kids attend this event, and that is no joke. We need donations of candy if you don't want to do a trunk, but if you would like to dress up, have a trunk, be part of someone else's trunk, like it's such a fun event, and the more trunks we have, the more fun it is for the kids that come. We had a huge showing from our neighborhood and other community kiddos last year, and their costumes are adorable, so come do that. All right, that is